Okay, the next chapter we're going to be looking at is Chapter 5, and this is still part of our Module 2 from the CDPH on residence rights. And part of residence rights is learning some of the ethics and laws that are involved with maintaining a patient's rights. It's very important that we do this for all of the people we care for. So when we're looking at ethics and we're looking at residence rights, as far as what do we mean by ethics? What do we mean by ethics? Ethics is knowledge of right and wrong. So we did talk about ethical behavior before when we were looking at our introduction into a CNA. We are looking at ethics, work ethics. We were looking at school ethics, but ethics is the knowledge of right and wrong. It's making moral choices. It's what we should and shouldn't be doing. Not what we can and can't do, what we should and shouldn't be doing. And we always want to make sure that we're not prejudiced or biased in any way when we're caring for our residents. CNAs have codes of ethics, which are rules or standards of a group or a profession. So nursing has a code of ethics, and CNA is going to fall into that, of things that we should be doing. So one thing that we always have to think about when we're meeting our residents' rights is we want to make sure that we have professional boundaries, that we understand what professional boundaries are. And professional boundaries help us separate helpful behaviors from non-helpful behaviors. So our professional boundaries are things that we're doing to help get the resident better. It's not things that we're doing to make us feel better. It's things that we're doing to help the resident achieve their optimal level of care. So some things we have to keep in mind as far as boundary levels go is do not date or flirt. Okay, we should not be doing that. Now, I have to tell you, a lot of the residents are going to flirt with you. I've had residents say, "Oh, you're just so beautiful," and just say, "Oh, well, thank you, that's nice," and we just kind of move on. But don't flirt. Don't, the more you jest with things, sometimes the more out of control it can get. So if someone tells you you look nice, that's fine. Just say thank you. But if somebody's flirting with you, you can just say thank you, and then just always make sure you keep it at a very professional level. We need to make sure we use touch correctly. Now, one thing I'm going to mention about touch, well, a couple things I'm going to mention about touch, is you really need to look at clues from your resident when you're touching them. So when I meet someone, I'm a big believer in touch. I think touch is very therapeutic. I think touch is shows that we're compassionate and caring. And so when I meet a resident for the first time, I will usually touch their arm. I mean, I'll come in, I'll introduce myself, I'll touch their hand, I'll touch their arm. If I see them pull their hand or their arm away, I know that's something that they're not comfortable with. That's a boundary level that they're not okay with. And so I'll always, just say, "Oh, I apologize, and I won't do that." But I will tell you, when I first became a nurse, if I took care of someone who was crying and, they were upset, I'd be like, "Oh, you need a hug." And I would just give them this big old hug. I don't do that anymore. If I have a resident who's crying, it's like, "You look like you need a hug. Is that okay?" You need to ask permission. Things can be seen as doing, crossing a boundary line. Can be misunderstood or misconstrued in some way. So you need to be careful with touch. It's an important part of healthcare, but we need to use it correctly. We need to make sure that the person's comfortable with it. And again, we can always ask. Okay. Do not take gifts, and don't give gifts. Okay. And, there are times that it's like, "Oh, I just know that person would love that thing," and you want to buy them gifts, but you can be crossing a boundary line with that. And always make sure you don't take money or gifts from them. And they're going to want to give you things. Sometimes they try to pay you. So especially as a student, we have a little bit more time. We start off with less residents than the regular CNAs do. And so we do, we have extra time that we can just sit and read a book with them, read a book to them, or play a game with them, or go do activities with them. We have time that we'll do their nails or help them with their hair. And they're like, "Oh, let me give you money. Let me give you money." You never take money. You never take gifts for the care that you give. Now, if a family member brings in, oranges off their tree, of course you can take that. You say, "Oh, I'll take it to the nurse's station and let everybody share it." Okay? That is fine, but otherwise don't take money and don't take gifts. We do not borrow things from patients. You do not borrow one thing from a resident to use on another resident. You don't use their supplies. Patients or residents should always have their own separate supplies. You don't borrow their personal items for anything. Always make sure you do not do that. And again, we've talked about confidentiality. We'll continue to talk about this as we go through the class. We cannot share personal or financial information. We don't share our personal or financial information with them, and we don't share their personal or financial information with other people. So I have seen CNAs sometimes. I was like, oh my gosh, they're telling their resident, I'm so broke, and I have school coming up, and I've got this going on, I've got that going on, and I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And the next thing you know, these residents are trying to offer them money. You should not be sharing any information like that. So one thing we're going to tell you as far as boundaries go, when you are meeting a resident, when you're caring for someone, you're going to be having conversations with them, especially in a nursing home setting. In a hospital, when people come into a hospital, they tend to get discharged. Usually the average stay in a hospital is like 2 days, I think is the average stay in a hospital. In a nursing home, some of these people are going to come in there and they're going to live there. We have one resident at one of the facilities we go to who's been there for 25 years. So you're going to get to know these people and they're going to get to know you. And I think it's really okay to, when I'm bathing a resident and they're talking to me and it's like, oh, do you have kids? I mean, I'll say, yeah, I have 2 kids, and yes, I have 2 grandkids, but I don't give them detailed information about my personal life. It's more general, like if you just met someone at a party, how much would you share with them? That's the most you should really be sharing with a resident. Now, some legal aspects. Laws tell us what we can and can't do. So ethics are what we should and shouldn't do. Laws tell us what we can and can't do. And there's criminal laws and there's civil laws. So criminal laws are things that are offenses against the public and society. So they're things that impact the general society, the general community that you live in. So civil laws are going to be more relationships. Those are going to be individual issues that you have, say, with your neighbor. You're fighting over a tree that's on your property. I mean, that's going to be a civil law type of thing versus a criminal law, where you're burglary or murder, something along those lines. To keep yourself from being sued, to keep yourself from having any type of legal, problem, always protect yourself. And one of the best things you can do for that is explain what you're doing to them at all times. Remember, give them choices. Let them know what you're doing. We need to use good communication. We ask permission before we give care. We explain what we're doing as we're giving it. And when we're done, we always follow up to make sure that they're doing okay. And that's going to keep you from a lot of problems. Think about this again. This is their home. So for many of these people, this is going to be the last home that they will have. Some people, you'll see CNAs walk into the room sometimes and they don't knock. You always knock. How would you like it if someone just walked into your house and started doing something to you without, they just walked in and started getting you dressed? This is their home. You knock, you ask permission before you give care, you give them choices, you're always explaining to them what you're doing for them. Now, there are unintentional torts, unintentional things, which is a little bit different than abuse. Not that negligence and malpractice are usually when things happen to the person, but it was unintentional. You didn't mean for it to happen. You shouldn't have done what you did, or you maybe didn't do it as correctly as you could have, but you didn't do it with the intent of causing them harm. Now, it's still not saying that you can't get accused of abuse, but it's probably not going to end up being convicted of abuse. Abuse, there's usually an intent level with it. But what negligence is it's not acting in a reasonable and careful manner. So Not acting in a reasonable and careful manner. So if you were a bystander, so let's say there was a car accident and you witnessed the car accident, you saw this car crash happen, and you went over and you were worried that the car might catch on fire, even though there was no evidence of that, but you thought, oh, maybe the car might catch on fire, so I'm going to get them out of that car and drag them to safety. But in that process, that neck injury that they had now caused them to be paralyzed because you moved it. That you could be accused, that would be a negligence. You didn't act in a reasonable and careful manner as any other reasonable and careful adult would have done in that situation. Malpractice is negligence by a professional person when you're not meeting your standards of care. And what I mean by standards of care is how you're trained. So let me give you the perfect example of this. We are going to teach you to use your gait belts. Gait belt, G-A-I-T, gait, not G-A-T-E like shutting a gate. This is gait like an ambulation gait. So when a person is getting up and they're going to walk in the hallway or they're going to walk over to the bathroom, if they are a fall risk, standard of care is you will put a gait belt on them. That is a standard of care for a fall risk patient. Now, a lot of facilities actually have a policy that states if the patient is a fall risk, you will apply a gait belt when you get them up. So you know this, you know the patient's a fall risk. You're getting them up to go to the bathroom. You're like, oh, I don't want to bother with my gait belt. Okay. And you get them up to the bathroom without the gait belt and you're walking them over to the bathroom and they fall. Okay, now that person gets hurt. Let's say they break their hip when they fall or they hit their head when they fall. You are going to have a malpractice case against you because you did not do not just what a reasonable and careful bystander would do. You didn't do what someone with the same training and the same level as you should have done. You did not do what you were trained to do. You did not follow your policy. So that is going to make you potential malpractice suit, okay, against you. You are liable for your actions. And I will tell you, I unfortunately see a lot of CNAs sometimes that are like, oh, I can get them up and I don't want to deal with the gait belt. And they get patients up all the time without those gait belts. But if that patient falls, they're not meeting their own policy and they're not following how they were trained. And I do not ever want you to do that. Our policy at this school is you will use a gait belt on all fall risk patients. And when you and the facilities that we are going to be taking you to, their requirement is that you will have another CNA there or your instructor with you when you are transferring patients out of bed. So when you get a patient from bed to a wheelchair or from bed to the bathroom or walking them in the hallway, you're going to get either the regular CNA or you're going to get your instructor to help you with that, because we want to make sure that our patients are not falling while we're there. So standard of care, this is how you are being trained. And so that is something that you are held to that level if something happens to your patient. We're going to go ahead and just take a break here.